Thanks for clicking. Does Canada have a housing supply problem? If you asked any expert, any politician, any central banker during Canada's real estate boom, then the surge in housing prices was due almost entirely to a lack of supply. However, since the peak of Canada's real estate boom in February, our average home price has lost almost $170,000. So clearly, it wasn't just supply that was pushing up prices. But the question of supply continues to matter, with the Government of Canada announcing that we would be receiving 1.5 million immigrants by 2027, and some experts arguing that the increase in immigration will put a floor on our housing prices. Canada's housing supply and its effect on our real estate prices will no doubt dominate the national conversation on real estate in Canada for years to come.
Doubt it.
So what I want to do today is go over those experts that say Canada has a real supply problem, go over those detractors that say that the supply problem is nothing but a myth, go over what the data says, and then discuss what to look for next. We're going to be having our monthly update on Canada's mortgage rates in a few days, and we'll obviously continue to track Canada's real estate market on this channel. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into Canada's housing supply. Very briefly, as we all heard ad nauseum during the housing boom, that one of the main reasons for Canada's upsurge in prices was a lack of supply. We heard it from the Bank of Canada.
The solution to this problem is supply. We've got to increase supply of housing.
We also heard it from the three main political parties during the 2021 election, as each tried to outbid each other over who could build the most homes. And finally, we heard it from the Canadian Real Estate Association, which, while forecasting a strong 2022, said that supply, the most needed and also the most long-term of interventions, wouldn't help prices in 2022.
Okay, surprise.
Yet during the real estate boom, there was very few detractors on the "it's all the supply" argument, except for the Bank of Montreal. BMO economist Robert Kavchik noted in December 2021 that Canada didn't have a supply problem, that it was a demand issue. He doubled down on this notion in January of 2022, right before we peaked, saying that the distinction between demand strength and very normal resale supply flow couldn't be more obvious here, and flies in contrast to the popular narrative that we are supply starved. By April, BMO economist Doug Porter was asking, can we please stop with the supply myth, arguing that Canada's own 2022 budget showed Canada's housing supply is not lower than the US, yet somehow the average home price in Canada is 60% higher. And Doug Porter's message echoed what was starting to become clear in the 2021 census data, that, at least in some cities, housing supply was keeping up or outstripping population growth. In fact, Andy Yan, a professor at SFU University, and the Union of BC Municipalities sought to study how much housing supply was related to price growth. They found that between 2016 and 2021, Vancouver had a net population gain of 31,000 and an increase of 19,000 in the number of dwellings. Yan found that when you consider that the average household size in BC as of 2016 was 2.4, the number of new homes aligns closely with the population growth, making it very difficult to blame supply on the 17.3% price growth that was seen in Vancouver. So the report found that with the average household size being 2.4, meaning 2.4 people per dwelling, that the population growth did not outstrip supply in Vancouver from 2016 to 2021. We're going to get to Canada-wide in a minute, I promise. The report, however, was not without its detractors. And this is where this really gets interesting. Richmond councillor Andy Hobbs called the report simplistic and said that the time frame of the study was too short, that we need to look at the cumulative effect of housing supply versus population growth over decades. The article citing Hobbs relies heavily on a report by the BC government, which relied heavily on a report by Scotiabank. The report by Scotia, cited by the government, argued that Canada is 1.8 million homes short of what we need to have similar housing supply as the rest of the G7. The Scotia report noted that Canada has the lowest number of housing units per 1,000 residents of any G7 country. As a brief side note, the Scotia report, cited by the BC government, got the numbers wrong, putting the US at 427 homes per 1,000 and Canada at 424. The actual numbers cited by the federal government in the 2022 budget put Canada at 427 and the US at 425. So Canada is not any worse off than the US. In fact, we're better off than the US, which in fact is part of the G7. And this could very well be why Doug Porter capitalized the word "not" in his assertion that Canada wasn't lower than the US, in his warning that Canada's lack of supply was a myth. Scotiabank very well could have been looking at old OEC data, but Scotiabank doesn't cite its sources very well. The federal government, on the other hand, does cite its sources, and it was looking at a report from the 2021 OECD survey, which I pulled that report, link in the description, and it, in fact, does align with the federal government. So Canada has more homes per 1,000 people than does the United States. So the BC government cited a Scotiabank study saying Canada was the worst off in the G7, and the study was reported elsewhere, and it's not even true.
But so what? So what? It was a
But I digress. Let's do what the counselor said that we should do. Let's look at the past few decades and see, is Canada moving a larger amount of people into a smaller amount of homes? Which, if it were, would certainly account for the major increase in prices. If we look back to the 2016 census data, back then we averaged 2.4 persons per dwelling, the same amount that we do right now. If we go back to the 2011 census, we averaged 2.5 persons per dwelling. So it was worse.
but so what?
In 2006, it was very similar. We had 2.5 people per home. We had 2.6 in 2001 and 2.6 in 1996. So, going back 26 years, we have the least amount of people per dwelling that we've ever had. So if we're going to measure supply problems by the amount of homes per 1,000 people, as does Scotiabank, as does BMO, as does the federal government, then things have actually gotten better over the past few decades. Now, obviously, these are very crude indicators, but if they're going to be used by Scotia, by BMO, by the federal government, and then publicized as a means of discussing Canada's housing supply problems, then I think it's fair game for us to look at it in that manner as well. But what about house prices in 2016, when we had the same amount of people per homes that we do right now? The average price of a home in Canada in 2016 was $490,000. 6 years later, it's $644,000. In February, when Canada's real estate market hit its peak, we were at $816,720. So about $320,000 more to buy the average home in Canada in just over 6 years, with still having the exact same amount of people per dwelling that we had 6 years ago. And this could very well be why Doug Porter was arguing earlier on that not only does Canada have a better housing supply than the United States, but our homes are 60% more than those of the US. Yet the idea that Canada's housing supply, or lack thereof, will provide a floor for our real estate prices continues. During an interview with the Globe and Mail, Don Kotick, CEO of Sotheby's International Realty, said that at the very core and the fundamentals of the Canadian marketplace, we have a chronic shortage of housing relative to our population, and added that an increase in immigration will put pressure on the housing market. And sure, long term, it very well might, but not in the short term, not by spring of 2023, when many are predicting Canada's prices will bottom. And that's not to say that immigration won't put prices up. Doug Porter, one of the only ones to call nonsense on the supply argument during the boom, says immigration pushes up prices long term. But that's long term. For now at least, while this real estate correction continues, our number of people per dwelling remains unchanged from where it was 6 years ago, when the average price was $490,000. A $490,000 average house price, that would represent a 40% price drop from our peak in February of 2022. So the idea that Canada's housing supply, or lack thereof, is going to provide a floor for this real estate market correction is just not borne out in the data. With that said, we will continue to cover Canada's real estate price corrections on this channel. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, thanks so much for watching.